welcome back to In the Minds of Madness. If you look around, you'll see a lot of movies and video games that are either inspired by Lovecraft or heavily based around Lovecraft's work. Today, we're going to turn away from that to go to a medium that most people don't think about, and that is comics. Today we will be discussing 5 Lovecraftian comics. Now, each of these, they are either printed comics or webcomic series. And the criteria I chose for this list is each story is an original story, not just a remake of one of Lovecraft's works, which there are many of those, and a few of them play on Lovecraft himself. 2 on this list, actually, the main character is Lovecraft, and it kind of takes a spin on who he was and how things actually worked. To start off this list is a comic featuring Lovecraft himself, entitled The Strange Adventures of H.P. Lovecraft. Now, this comic was printed by Image Comics. This story is an original take on Lovecraft himself, and it has an interesting explanation behind the reason why Lovecraft imagined all these things. It is a 4-issue series. It's already been completed. I believe you can pick up a graphic novel collection of all 4 issues. In the story, I won't spoil too much of it, but Lovecraft, whenever he falls asleep, the things from his imagination and his dreams come out to the real world and start wreaking havoc. And it's him trying to find out what's causing it and resolving the issues with that. It's an interesting read. I enjoyed it. Now, number 2 on this list is a webcomic entitled Owl My Sanity. While it's not really a Lovecraftian story, it is heavily Lovecraftian influenced. As in, the story itself takes place in Lovecraft's world, but in modern times. The main character, he is an art student at a university that was originally Miskatonic University. And the city it takes place in is the remnants of Kingsmouth, Arkham, and Dunwich all fused together into one city. So this entire story takes place in the settings of all of Lovecraft's writing, and a lot of the creatures and powers in his writings pop up. Now, it's not a serious Lovecraftian story. There are a few tropes that don't really fit. While it is not as bad as some of the abominations that have been made, which we'll be talking about one in the next video, this one is not very serious. A lot of the Lovecraftian creatures end up taking a female form. It's an interesting take on Lovecraft's work, but if you're looking for something very serious, very Lovecraftian, like Lovecraftian horror, this one might not be the best for you. Now, unfortunately, with Owl My Sanity, it went on hiatus during 2011, and the artist hasn't touched it since. So the story is incomplete. It took me about an hour and a half, 2 hours to read through the entire thing, so just keep in mind you will not get any resolution to the story and really find out what's going on. I believe it is an abandoned comic, so look into it at your own risk on that. That brings us to number 3, which is a newer series that just started within the last couple of months. It is a printed comic entitled Harold, Lovecraft and Tesla. It's an interesting story. I haven't read too much into it, haven't had a chance to. It is a new comic. It is published by Action Lab Comics, and it revolves around a unlikely team-up between H.P. Lovecraft and Nikola Tesla. Story is Nikola Tesla is in a relationship with Amelia Earhart, and it takes place around the time of Earhart's historical flight where she disappeared. And from the evidence that Tesla picks up, he feels that she's been sucked into another dimension or another layer of reality, which ends up with him teaming up with Lovecraft, because Lovecraft with his knowledge of interdimensional travel and creatures, because everything that he writes is actually real and things that he's learned. And it's the two of them teaming up to try to save her. But it is an enjoyable read, and the direction that it's going in is interesting. And I will probably be trying to get the rest of them and reading up on it. I believe at this point there are 5 issues. So it is an enjoyable read. Pick it up if you get the chance. It might be a little bit difficult to find if you go to comic stores, but you can definitely find it online. Next up on our list is number 4, and one of my favorites on this list. Not my favorite, but very, very close. That is Not Drunk Enough, which is a webcomic. Now, Not Drunk Enough, it has some humor to it. It's got amazing art style. The story is heavily Lovecraft. The story revolves around Logan, who is a repairman. Him and another repairman get called into a science lab to do some repairs when all things go to hell. And he ends up getting drawn into what seems to be the fallout of a scientist's mad experiment, which has caused the creation of Lovecraftian horrors and the alteration of humans into other things. It is Logan with 3 other survivors trying to make it out alive. One of the survivors is one of the scientists that was on the original team that got turned by the mad scientist into a creature. So it's an interesting read. It has some comedy in it, but it started early to mid 2015. The story shows a lot of promise to turn into a deep Lovecraftian horror, because the artists themselves have stated that they're wanting it to be a horror story. So that one is a definite read, in my opinion, if you love Lovecraft. And now our number 5, which, in my opinion, is some of the best Lovecraftian horror style comics, is almost anything done by Junji Ito. Now, Junji Ito, he is a mangaka, or comic book artist in Japan, and he has cited Lovecraft as one of his major influence. Now, Ito, he has become a very prolific artist, creating some of the most renowned horror comics to come out of Japan. And it has come out that he was actually working with Del Toro and Kojima on Silent Hills. He was going to be doing the creature designs, and you should be seeing examples of his art style, which, seeing that, shows just how much of a disappointment it is that Silent Hills will never be made. But if you want something really creepy, really unsettling, not just in story and art style, pick up anything he makes. Now, of course, him being Japanese and Japanese artist, comic book writer, a lot of his stories are steeped in Japanese culture, Japanese lore, and some of them tend to be nothing more than traditional Japanese horror stories, which are not bad. They are good. They are some of the most enjoyable horror stories for me. They don't fit the whole Lovecraftian horror thing, but some of his work, some of his most popular work, is heavily Lovecraft. Like an example, one of his stories starts out with an astronomer who finds a new galaxy. All of a sudden, him and someone else he was working with start having migraines. And then they start hearing things, and it ends up they're able to pick up on other people's thoughts. And once the news of that whole incident gets out, other people start making discoveries of different galaxies, and the same things start happening. And weird things start happening to the people who see these galaxies. And it gets to the point that these galaxies start getting to the point where you could see them with the naked eye from Earth. and it starts driving people into psychotic episodes where they kill each other. Which, it's an interesting read. I won't go too much farther into it, but that's kind of how his non-Japanese ghost story horror tends to go. He has a tendency to not explain everything. Some of the issues he does, but many of the issues, there's no explanation for what's going on. Like that one I was talking about. Everything resolves and no one knows why it happened or what those galaxies really were. So he is a definite look into if you love Lovecraftian horror and want some sort of graphic medium to go through. Those are my 5 comics, web and printed, that I feel are good reads for anyone who enjoys Lovecraft or anything Lovecraftian. Now, each of these will have a separate link in the description. For the webcomics, it will be a link to the main site of the comic itself, and for the printed comics, there will be links to Amazon, to where you can look at prices and all synopsis, to where you can decide if you want to buy them or not. Also, in the description, there is a link to a list of comics I found. These comics, I didn't peruse too deeply into it because most of the ones I saw are comic renditions of Lovecraftian's stories himself. It's people's takes on his stories and just putting them in the comic medium. So I felt they weren't 100% original in that aspect. I wanted to focus on more original work. So, but there'll be the link in the description if you want to check those comics out. So, that brings us to the end of another episode. So, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.